Greetings viewers, JLB back with another video to cap off the year of 1962 here on Anime Television History Tour. But before we get started, I have a bit of something special to say. You see, the show we're going to be talking about is out of the US. That is to say, it's not made in the United States. It was made elsewhere, specifically for our case, England. Now when it comes to shows that come from other countries like England or Japan for people who watch anime, or even from other countries like France or Italy or even Australia, I'm going to try and be as lenient as possible. Basically, if it's a show that aired in the respective home country as well as was imported over to the US, I'll talk about it. But bear in mind, I'm only going to be talking about shows that were seen as appropriate for children. So does that mean Ben and Holly's Little Kingdom? Yes. Does that mean the newest Italian show on behalf of the Paramount or Viacom camp, 44 Cats? Yes. Does that include other British television shows that aired for children and were animated, be it classic animation or stop-motion animation? Absolutely. Does that include Japanese anime? Yes, but that involves a smidge bit more decision on my part. Simply because I only talk about shows that were made specifically for children, not necessarily for hardcore anime fans. I mostly cover anime. Well, the only anime I've seen are based on popular license, like Pokemon, Bakugan, Yu-Gi-Oh!, Beyblade, and other shows of that nature. The only exception to that would have to be one that I've seen from Kyoto Animation by the name of K-On! That's going to be the only exception. So, any show that deals with a popular franchise here in the US, well, both in Japan and the US, yes. For shows that found a cult following here in the US and were a major hit in Japan, supposedly so. So, yes to Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh!, no to Bleach, Naruto, My Hero Academia, Hunter x Hunter, and all those other anime. My highest apologies to all you anime fans out there. But we're not going to go to Japan, we're heading to England, because today's topic is a British science fiction show called Fireball XL5. Now this show followed the missions of the spaceship Fireball XL5, commanded by one Colonel Steve Zodiac of the World Space Patrol. This show aired in England between October 28th of 1962, and October 27th of 1963. Nearly a full year, but short by a day. It was originally seen on ATV in the UK, which, if I'm reading this correctly, it was mostly aired in the, if my map's correct, I have to say the lower part of England. But anyway, this show is unique because instead of traditional animation or stop-motion animation, we mostly have to deal with puppets. Now, I'm not talking about the Jim Henson style of puppets like you see on the Muppets. And I'm definitely not talking about any other form of puppetry, like you would see in a show like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: The Next Mutation, or Dinosaurs. I'm specifically talking about marionette puppets, the kind that walk with strings. Now, for those of you who don't know what a marionette puppet is, it basically is, as I said, a puppet with strings attached. They're mostly used in the old-fashioned kind of puppet shows. Now, a good example of this would be the Woody's Roundup Gang television show, as seen in the movie Toy Story 2. But we'll get to Toy Story 2 and talk about that when we get to the 90s. But for now, let's talk a little bit more about Fireball. Now, this show happened to feature, well, first of all, it was made by the by the husband and wife duo Jerry and Sylvia Anderson through their company APF in association with ATV for ITC Entertainment. And the show featured the Andersons' Super Marionation, a form of puppetry first introduced in shows like Four Feather Falls in 1960 and Supercar the previous year, 1961, and was used again in many other productions that they made, like Stingray, the ever-popular Thunderbirds, Captain Scarlet, Joe 90, and the Secret Service. There were about 39 half-hour episodes made on 35mm film, all in black and white. So, unfortunately, well, first of all, I happen to have a little bit of heritage going back to England, but unfortunately at this point, I can't be entirely certain if England had color television back in the 60s, or if they just had regular black and white, like we had over here in the States before color television was invented. Now, the reason I'm covering this specific show is, like I said, if it's a foreign show, it has to have an English dub, if by chance it's voiced by foreign actors, or if it's made in England, it has to be aired here in the US. And Fireball XL falls under the aired in England, aired in the US category, because several Anderson series have been shown in the US. However, Fireball XL5 is the only Anderson series to have a run on NBC. NBC ran the series in its Saturday morning children's block from 1963 to September of '65. Now, let's talk a bit more about the show. Now, the show was supposedly set between the years 2062 and 2063, and honestly, we're about 40 years off from that, 42 to 43 years off from that date, if you understand the numbers. The series featured the missions of the spaceship Fireball XL5, commanded by Colonel Steve Zodiac, whom I mentioned, of the World Space Patrol. The crew includes the glamorous Dr. Venus, a doctor of space medicine, the middle-aged navigator and engineer Professor Matthew Medic, and the co-pilot Robert, a transparent anthropomorphic robot who most often proclaimed, "On our way home," most of the time. Now, Robert was the only main character in an Anderson series which was actually voiced by Anderson himself, albeit with the aid of an artificial larynx. As Anderson described in a deleted scene of filmed in Supermation, it was rather difficult, but if not impossible, to produce the sound of a robot. Now, in this series, the World Space Patrol is based at Space City, located on an unnamed island in the South Pacific, headed by one Commander Zero. Commander Zero is assisted by Lieutenant 90. Now, for unspecified reasons, the 25-story T-shaped Space City control tower rotates. In one particular episode, a character inadvertently made it rotate fast enough for the insides to suffer from a little bit of vertigo. So, yeah. I could pretty much almost see why the future seen in this show isn't necessarily the future that we might see. Now, as for the Fireball ship itself, it was inspired by an old Soviet design from way back when the Soviet Union was a thing. Now, a concept was also used in the film When Worlds Collide, for some of you old school hardcore science fiction fans. The World Space Patrol also operates a fleet of at least 30 Fireball XL ships, with an XL30 being referred to in an episode called The Firefighters. And the XL5, which the show is named after, is the most famous. But when you get down to the nitty-gritty, it's basically your standard travel from planet to planet, solve different planetary crises, or conduct planetary investigation, or rescue a stranded crew. This sort of standard, but not really standard science fiction space opera affair. Not necessarily space opera, because that would come years later in the form of Star Wars, but that's another story. I'm not necessarily all too familiar with shows in the vein of Fireball XL5 or even the Thunderbirds. But I can say this, they were influential for their time, because without these sort of shows, we most likely wouldn't have seen the Woody's Roundup show for Toy Story 2. But then again, you can also give credit to the Howdy Doody show, but then again, it wasn't entirely made from puppets. It only featured one marionette puppet, the title character himself, Howdy Doody. But I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. Is Fireball XL worth it? Well, again, I haven't seen many episodes, but I have to say, it is rather interesting to see where shows from the past, like the Thunderbirds, came from. So, if you're in the mood for some British science fiction, I say give Fireball XL5 a try. If anything else, you'll at least see where the puppet style for the Woody's Roundup show came from. And with that, thank you all for watching, and stay tuned, because we are going to be talking about the first shows of 1963. Until then, stay animated, and I'll see you all next time.